Thank you for that very loving and generous introduction. So I am Jess Mills. I'm the co-founder of Act for Cancer, the Tessa Jowell Movement for Change, and I'm also now on the executive leadership team for the Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission. So for those that didn't know my story, before Jack introduced it, my mum was Tessa Jowell, one of the most fearless, courageous, change-making women of her generation. As her daughter, the experience I bring to our mission is that of the patient, that of the carer, the treatment navigator, and the patient advocate. Every waking moment after Mum's diagnosis with a glioblastoma, I lived with her on the front lines of the patient journey, the same journey that thousands of newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients are cast off into every year. Our story began at 6:45 p.m. on the 24th of May 2017. Mum had 2 major seizures and was subsequently diagnosed with a grade 4 glioblastoma in the left temporal lobe of her brain. The magic of our ordinary life ruptured then forever. Nothing can prepare a patient or family for a diagnosis like glioblastoma, and even for a family of staunch optimists like my own, when presented with a median prognosis of 14 months, a standard of care which offers no hope for long-term survival or good quality of life, and only 2% of patients making it onto randomised controlled trials, we were cast off into a landscape that felt impossibly dark, or totally disorientated by grief, and the sheer disbelief that this could happen to the person most central to our universe. However, what we didn't know at this point was that we were already at the lucky end of an awful spectrum. As the news of Mum's diagnosis became known to friends and colleagues, we quickly found ourselves under the guidance and advice of some of the leading global experts in neuro-oncology and medical innovation, one of whom was Dr. Jack to my right here. And that crushingly low ceiling of options was removed, and in the coming weeks and months, a galaxy of other options on the front lines of innovation were revealed to us. Genomic data was sequenced, and then everything from nutraceuticals to repurposed medications to off-label cancer drugs could be recommended, many of which, when used in combination, had shown evidence of patients hugely outliving their prognosis and, really importantly, with good quality of life. Mum was monitored in real time, so we were able to adapt her treatments based on how she was responding. Adaptation of treatments is essential. If something isn't working, you need to know immediately. It can literally be a matter of life or death. And now this may sound neurotic in the extreme, but glioblastoma treatments grow at a rate of a centimetre per month, so the adaptive approach is essential if we want patients like her to survive. In the absence of any adaptive trial framework to try these things in a controlled and ethical way, we had to piece this highly complex process together ourselves and to fight tooth and nail to access these other treatment options independently. For that past year, this became my life. A full-time occupation which is officially termed patient advocate. What it actually is a work of love, generated by the sheer desperation to do anything possible to save the person that you love beyond description. But we were the lucky ones, because most crucially, beyond anything else, this highly ambitious, innovative approach offered us something that was most precious of all and sustained us until the very final days of Mum's life. It gave us hope. Hopelessness for patients and families is even more crushing than the diagnosis itself. Hope can sometimes be the most transformative medicine of all. But the question we could not stop asking ourselves was, what about the millions of other cancer patients, like her, being diagnosed with an untreatable form of cancer? What do they do? How do they cope without this extraordinary network of support? The only time I saw Mum cry throughout her illness was after one of her radiotherapy appointments that summer. She had observed the waiting room of people and processed the brutal realisation that the fate of every person in that room had already been determined by their privilege or their lack of it, and how that would then determine them to go beyond the terminal limitations of the standard of care. In her words, this was the most despicable example of inequality. Act for Cancer was founded by me, Mum, and Jack in the last 3 months of Mum's life, a call to arms to leaders in government, science, research, pharma, and the charitable sector to radically close this huge inequality and access to the best treatment and care for all those patients. We will make sure that the excellence, ambition, collaboration and access to the front lines of therapeutic innovation are not just accessible to the privileged few, but to everyone. Initially, we're modelling our systems to deliver this change through the work we're doing in the Tessa Jowell Brain Cancer Mission. And the Tessa Jowell Brain Matrix, which is the first ever truly personalised adaptive trial for brain cancer in the UK, is the flagship initiatives, one of the flagship initiatives of that mission. But it's not just a trial. The Tessa Jowell Brain Matrix is beyond a trial. It's an exemplar for how in the future we can manage and treat untreatable cancers in general. From a patient perspective, it has the opportunity to create a framework to start closing these huge gaps of inequality, not only around patient access to the best and most promising treatments, but also by creating a framework to crucially deliver alongside this the most cutting-edge, personalised care, because it's unquestionably clear that truly personalised treatment can't be delivered without the supporting role of truly personalised wraparound care. From a patient's perspective, I love to think that the Tessa Jowell Brain Matrix will be seen more as a means of accessing a personalised 360 care and treatment regime, as opposed to just being another trial. Imagine if the experience for patients could feel utterly different from anything else out there. So the trial is defined not only by its ambition, its progressive therapeutic thinking, and its cutting-edge practices, but also by its kindness and by its empathy and the support network it provides for patients and their loved ones. I think this is what will make it truly stand out from anything else out there, and in time can and will pave the way for a completely different kind of care for patients. Cancer doesn't just happen to the patient, it happens to their nearest loved ones and families too. So often, the role of carer falls to a family member who has had absolutely no experience whatsoever to equip them with the scale and enormity of what this role requires of them, and they have to learn fast and under intense emotional and practical pressure to learn how and what is needed in order for their most loved one to have the best possible chances. As I mentioned before, the word carer or advocate sounds so formal. Actually, what it is a work of love. Often patients with skilled, confident carers or with assertive, knowledgeable advocates have better outcomes. Patient advocacy or caring is actually life-saving or life-extending work. And the role these people have to play must start being seen as being integral to getting the best outcomes. So the question is, how can we use innovative, cutting-edge, adaptive trial networks like the Brain Matrix not only to deliver the most cutting-edge personalised treatments at scale, but also to empower patients and their carers to become co-producers of their treatment and care process, not just passive recipients of it. I see that the network of centres delivering the Tessa Jowell Brain Matrix has an opportunity to do both of these things, to set a new precedent for how patients can access personalised, adaptive combination therapies, but also to demonstrate the impact on outcomes of truly personalised, co-produced, patient advocate care. Medicine and innovation, at its absolute best, should be there to do something actually very, very simple. To enable patients to re-establish the magic of their ordinary lives. To enable patients and their families to live with a sense of peace and assurance that they or their most loved one are getting the best possible care and are being supported to live well at the same time. For what is good medicine there to do if it's not there to do just that? If we're truly putting patients at the forefront of our visions for the future, this is something that should unite us all with a collective sense of mission and of purpose. Act for Cancer has been created to deliver my mother's legacy and to ensure that the future will be a place where all cancer patients, through the National Health Service, facing an untreatable diagnosis, will have access to a world-class standard of care, offering personalised treatment and care to all patients with a rare or untreatable form of cancer, to provide the level of ambition, progressive collaboration and hope that my family experienced but at scale. The launch of the Brain Matrix marks a huge moment at which we can start to create the roads that will lead patients to a more hopeful, more equal future. And this approach doesn't only serve the patient, it serves the doctors and the scientific community too. And it's exactly this kind of holistic collaboration that will enable us to break through existing frontiers where better outcomes for previously intractable forms of cancer may well exist. It's not an exaggeration to say that every single person in this room will directly or indirectly benefit from our success. As I know all too well, the cruel sting of nature strikes indiscriminately. And with 1 in 2 of us now going to experience a cancer diagnosis in our lifetimes, the vision of this mission is one that should bind us all together with a collective sense of purpose, ambition, and fire in our hearts to do this for those that we love, for those that we have lost, and for those that this seeks to protect in the future. Last month, on the 12th of May, it was a year since my exquisite mum passed away. And while each day is still defined by the infinite scale of my loss, on days like today, it's also filled with immense pride and optimism for what we can achieve together. And I hope today is a moment for us all to imagine the future in a different way, where we can move forward together, charged with a sense of our collective ability to create the change that's needed, while never forgetting Mum's battle cry, to live well with cancer and not just die from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Always get teary when you speak, even though I've heard that once before or twice. Thank you. You took a few steps down. I'm going to have to ask you guys to take a few steps back again. You're definitely wanting to get that exercise in, even at the 39.5 weeks. There you go. That's inspiration for all of us. If you don't mind, I'm going to invite Natalie Banner from the Wellcome Institute, who's very kindly agreed to moderate what I think will be an amazing panel, really getting into the weeds of putting medicine on trial with Chelsea Leyland. Is Chelsea here? There you are. I didn't see you over there, but nice to see you, Chelsea. And 3 other great friends of mine, Mark Wilkins, who's a patient advocate and patient experience director at Havas, Matt Eagles, who's the head of patient experience and engagement at Havas, and Marje, Isabelle, who is the founder and director of Fertile Matters, and who apparently is also my wife.
My word.
Thanks everyone very much for making it on this very soggy afternoon to this last session, which I think is going to be a fantastic one indeed.
Hi Chelsea, how are you?
Tech is often hailed as a great disruptor in healthcare. You know, we're here at an AI festival, we're talking all about the potential excitement of new technology. But I think if we think about disruption as being about challenging conventional models of care and upending traditional dynamics of power between patients and the healthcare system, then I think our panelists represent the very best kinds of disruptors we could possibly ask for, because they're talking about the disruptive and transformative potential of people, of actually listening to people's experiences and what matters to them and what they care about, and not just the way that technology could potentially change how care is delivered and how science and research is conducted. So how much could we improve and transform healthcare if we paid more attention and really genuinely put the perspectives of patients and carers and, frankly, people at the heart of the way technology develops and so on. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists to the stage. And what I'm going to do is just ask them each briefly to introduce themselves, give a little bit of their background, and then we'll launch into some questions that I hope are going to really get to the heart of this challenge that I think listening to the patient perspective can bring to medicine, to tech, and to healthcare. So, Mark, would you just like to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Wilkins. I'm the Patient Experience Director for Havas, Lynx, Faze. Faze is the patient recruitment clinical trial division of Havas, Lynx in the UK. My background, I've worked in patient recruitment now and engagement for the last 8 years nearly. I'm 12 years a cancer survivor. Very similar to Jess, I lost my mum 2 years ago to glioblastoma stage 4, and 5 years before that I lost my dad to rare stomach cancer. So I've seen that kind of thing quite closely, that's put a lot of that sort of stuff into my day-to-day.
Thank you. Marge?
Hi, I'm Marge. I suppose a bit of background career-wise, I've been in charity management for about 20 years, and then that kind of changed. 8 years ago I was undergoing routine fertility investigations and diagnosis of ovarian and womb cancer came up, and so there followed a very long journey into IVF, cancer treatment, surrogacy, and eventually menopause. And so, as they say, there's nothing like a life event to sort of really motivate you to find out what your thing is. And so my thing became, I set up a consultancy around helping women, specifically around trying to figure out their fertility options, and then more recently looking into how tech can better manage menopause symptoms for women. So there we go.
Thank you. Matt?
My name's... Crikey, this is really loud. I love it. My name's Matt Eagles, and I'm Head of Patient Engagement at Havas, Lynx. If you see me twitching, by the way, I'm actually trying to get out of an invisible rope that somebody's tied me. No. I'm a positivity activist. I've had Parkinson's for 43 years. And it's not going to stand still, as you can see. I'm twitching a lot. I've actually just got back from Japan on Saturday for the World Parkinson's Congress. And I've got an awful lot of insight into what's going on in the Parkinson's community. But essentially, I like to see good communication between healthcare professionals and people in general. I think that's the most powerful form of communication you can possibly get. I'm sure all of you will agree. Jess, your story about your mum is incredibly powerful. And I would challenge anybody to go home this evening not thinking about what Jess has said. Storytelling is incredibly powerful. But positive storytelling is even more powerful.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Leyland. I am a patient and a medical cannabis advocate. I have a background as a DJ. I was diagnosed with a form of epilepsy when I was 15 years old, which is juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Epilepsy was already a huge part of my life because my sister suffers from a more severe form of the condition. She can have on a bad day up to 100 seizures a day. So when I was diagnosed, it was a little bit of a shock to myself and my family. And I was put on a cocktail of different anticonvulsants from when I was a teenager to try to control my seizures, and suffered from an array of sort of debilitating side effects as a result. And 2.5 years ago, I was lucky enough to be introduced to cannabidiol, which is CBD for those of you that don't know. And against my doctor's wishes and everyone around me, I decided to try to wean myself off my pharmaceuticals, and I've now been off of anticonvulsant pharmaceuticals for 2 years and haven't had one seizure since, and I'm using cannabis to treat my epilepsy. So my work comes from a very personal place. I'm also co-producing a documentary which explores the current landscape of medicinal cannabis. And my work centers around stigma, breaking down stigma around cannabis, epilepsy, other conditions, and patient access. I'm lucky enough to live in America, where I live in a state with a medical program, so I have access to safe, consistent medicine. And my sister's here in the UK and lives in full-time care and doesn't have access. So patient access is really my focus.
Jess, hearing your story is, choked me up, I have to say. It's incredibly powerful. You use words like love, empathy, kindness, hope. These are not words you often hear at a tech conference. And I just wanted to kick off by really asking your perspective on, with the personal take you're bringing to these issues, and the incredible, powerful story of your mum. How have you found navigating this whole world of clinical trials and evidence base and a kind of world in which these qualities, these kind of human compassionate qualities, don't necessarily come through very strongly? How have you found it navigating that?
So just a bit of background. I, by trade, I'm a songwriter and a musician, and I'm also the director of, I have been for a few years, of a humanitarian charity called Help Refugees, and so I came to this space with absolutely no prior knowledge or experience of the healthcare world at all. But I think that's actually what is it's serving quite good kind of communication on these issues, because I've come to this with no sense of red tape or how things should be done, and I guess there's a fresh perspective that comes with that, which is just grounded in the very, very human experience. And there's, I just said this in my speech, but when people talk about these very kind of innovative, high-tech, next-gen ways of working, blah, 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 it's like, no, from a patient perspective, all they want is to be able to return back to the magic of their ordinary lives. They don't want superhuman powers. They just want to be able to live, and to live their normal lives well, And I think people can get so distracted by the kind of quest for these, exciting, sort of innovative, techie things. And actually, who is this for? Who is it for? Is the pursuit of these things becomes, the thing in itself. And it's like, if we're really thinking about what all of these missions should be about, it should just be about this very, very simple thing, which is enabling a patient or a family just to live their normal life again. That when you get when Mum was diagnosed, all I could think about was just, it was nothing more that we wanted than just to be able to turn back to our normal lives. That's all you want. And so, people say out of the most kind of terrible experiences, sometimes really positive things can happen, and that's just what I'm trying to do, and to use everything that we've learnt and the privilege of the platform that we have to talk about it as a result of who Mum was, to really try and drive this change and to communicate what's really, really important. Yeah,
thank you. Before the panel, we were talking about some of the kind of interesting questions and this notion of developing healthcare and tech in a way that's patient-centric came up quite a lot. There's a bit of one of these buzzwords, and it feels as though there's a lot of talk about things should be centred around the patient. But Mark, I know I'd just like to draw you in on here that you have a particular view on whether this is actually happening in practice and what patient centricity really is.
Yeah, it's okay, in clinical trials, I think patient centricity has become sort of this misused buzzword. It's a hashtag on LinkedIn for a lot of people. It's a badge of honour that we kind of put our hands up and say, I'm patient centric, but what does it really mean? I think there's a positive spin to this as well. Like I like to think is that the industry at least has recognised that there's a change that's required. And the first steps to change are generally the hardest ones to do anyway. So I think that's one positive out of it. But this isn't changing just a simple process. This is flipping an entire approach on its head with the regulatory and compliance issues and laws that sit around it as well. So it's very much sort of a square peg round hole scenario. And I think what tends to happen is that we've got to get to the point with patient centricity. I mean, I've been a patient, we've got patients on the stage, I've done focus groups for patients. Ask a patient what patient centricity means. They literally have no idea, and then when you tell them and you say it's about making a patient the heart of a clinical trial or this or that, they would say, well, surely you should be doing that anyway. Why are you patting yourself on the back for something that should just be the norm, you know? And I think that what patient centricity needs to be is about it needs to be co-creation. It needs to be the patients designing and helping design those studies. At the moment, what we're doing is we're asking patients to jump on board a journey with a study design that's not had any consideration for their lives or any of the things that they go for on a day-to-day basis. And the fundamentals are just missing entirely. And I'm talking about clinical trials here as an example, but the fundamentals of good customer service just don't exist. And I'll give you an example. What we like to do at Faze is it's a broken system at the moment, right? We like to go in and show how broken it actually is. So what we try to do when we speak to pharma companies, these are top 10 pharma companies in the world with pipelines worth billions, and this is a problem that's worth or wasting $40 billion a year. We try to get onto their studies. You should really try it. This was a top 10 pharma company with a pipeline worth $4 billion. 17 days after making 12 different phone calls, 7 or 8 different emails, speaking to different offices around the world, I ended up speaking to a maternity ward in Cambridge for an oncology study. Now, if I'm a patient, I've given up 17 days ago. And that's not a one-off. That happens all the time. So I think we can say that patient centricity is at the moment a hashtag and a word, and actually it doesn't really feel like we've made much traction on it.
Mm. So I suppose from the perspective of someone who's sort of designing trials and so on, that's a huge challenge. Maybe it shouldn't be such a huge challenge, but it does seem to be really disrupting the kind of conventional model of the way things are done. Marje, I wanted to ask you about the way that you've sort of taken on this mantle of being someone who's gone, right, well, this isn't working for me, so I'm going to try and do something myself. I'm just going to... The system's not working, so I want to just drive and develop something for myself and for people like me. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into that space and how that sort of advocacy role became such a central part of what you do?
Well, I suppose I just felt really rubbish after going through my menopause, and there's lots of whispering out there about women going through the menopause. Oh my God! And but there wasn't sort of a solution that sort of hit me, or that other people were, sort of advocating, or it's still a big taboo, and there are areas, I suppose, of healthcare that are still big taboos. Cancer, maybe 50 years ago we called it the C word, but now we're talking about it openly, and it's a generation ago. So things do change, which I'm happy about. But I guess I went in search of trying to figure out, as a N of one, that kind of trying to figure out what would suit me, and what are the building blocks of trying to figure out what suits other people. We're not the same. Half the population goes through menopause, but the female experience is wide and varied. And so I thought, well, there must be some kind of intelligent way of figuring this out, and tech is the great white hope, isn't it? Really, trying to figure these things out. So I suppose instead of being, I wanted to be a partner to my own healthcare. I didn't want to be sort of as it's assumed currently by a lot of established providers, as we're sort of passive providers of data and information and that kind of thing. So I went out and I tried to do a sort of a citizen science study, I guess, and I won a little grant, and I wanted to figure out, well, how can we manage the symptoms that we go through by tracking hormones, by tracking our daily lives, and it's bloody hard doing that kind of study by yourself without an academic institution and lots of money sort of behind you. And so I got so far, but with my learnings, I went out and tried to find sort of other people in the space. It's a quiet space at the moment, and I've had many interesting travels, some very, very positive experiences, some not so positive experiences, and sort of this whole way of defining patient centricity. I suppose it's an interesting one, because it's convincing business or providers or clinicians or whoever it is that there is a return on investment, and so I went out to the West Coast, for instance, and tried to find some really clever people that could maybe help me set up a menopause management system. But again, it's trying to find that authenticity. It's not about chasing the profits it's not about chasing the profits. It's about finding that impact, which eventually will perhaps turn into some profits. But it's the mindset that needs to change around business trying to provide something for patients.
So that sort of upending of that traditional dynamic, I guess, it seems very central to many of your stories. Chelsea, I wanted to bring you in here. Your experience, you talked a lot about stigma and about sort of challenging the way things are usually done and the challenges you have around access to medicinal cannabis and so on. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, you expand a little bit on your own experience and how you think that patients can really sort of lead the way in not only sort of shaping the direction of the debate, but also leading the science and availability and accessibility of new healthcare and medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting moment. I mean, certainly with the sort of medical cannabis landscape, where what we're seeing is that these anecdotal accounts of patients using cannabinoid therapy, they are paving the way, and the science is struggling to catch up. And I think I speak from a patient perspective, and obviously, as I said before, a huge part of my work is really my fight to gain access for my sister and for other patients, because it is those that are in the most need that don't have a voice, that are suffering, and that's I fight for those patients that aren't able to kind of fight for themselves. But I think when we're talking about master regulatory system within our body, the endocannabinoid system, that people are just starting to discover and talk about. Doctors aren't even talking about this. They didn't learn about it in medical school. So patients are leading the way, because patients are going out. You mentioned before, the love that you feel for someone in your family, and I think that any parent, any sibling, any child, you wouldn't be normal if you didn't do everything in your power to fight for those that you love. And we're seeing that so clearly right now with, parents going out and trying to gain access to, cannabis-based treatments on the illicit market. And then they're sort of looked at like they're crazy, when actually it's, I would say, pretty normal that they would try to do everything. But when they're having these results and they're going into the doctor's office, the patients are educating the doctors. So I think we're living in this interesting time where you are your best advocate. Patients are really having to step forward, and I think a lot of patients feel let down by the medical system, and that's something that I feel, I would still be on medicine if I had listened to my neurologist, and it's challenging because we sort of enter into this world feeling that we should be able to trust these sort of figures of authority, our doctors, and when we realize that perhaps we might know better, it's an interesting moment in time, and I think for someone like myself that is what happens. So we have access to all this information. I guess that's the beauty of the internet and social media and Facebook groups, where we can contact other patients that are struggling with the same specific illness as us and see that they have used X, Y, Z and try to gain access ourselves. But for many patients, we don't have time to wait for clinical trials. They take years and years. They cost millions to conduct. And then when you're looking at something like cannabis, what's interesting is we see there are clinical trials done on isolated molecules, but when we are looking at whole plant treatments, that's a challenge, and it can't be patented, so that also is an issue there because it's a very interesting time. I think we have to empower patients and give them the courage and the tools to say, sometimes you do know what's best for you because you're struggling with this illness, not your doctor. And I think it's about working together. Can we be more of a team rather than just walking into a doctor's office and taking what they say as gospel? Oh, I'm in pain, give me opioids. Well, no, that's not the answer. So I think, we have to. I always talk about common sense. I think that sometimes when you were saying, to overly complicate things with tech and this and that, and a lot of the time. These decisions when it comes to kind of treating or what's best for us, I talk about common sense a lot because I think especially with something like cannabis, it's let's look at the side effects of a lot of these pharmaceuticals that we're told to take by our doctor. Parents, I connect with parents that are so afraid of using something from cannabis because of the stigma, but yet they're giving their children a cocktail of very, very harsh pharmaceuticals. So, yeah.
That sense of community seems to be, increasingly powerful, as you say, with the internet, with social media, and so on. Matt, I'm interested to know, you've just come back from Japan and the World Parkinson's Forum conference. That sense of community and that sense of togetherness must be a very important part of your experience as a Parkinson's patient. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about Japan, but also, you've as you say, you've been dealing with Parkinson's for many, many years now. Yeah. The extent to which that sort of sense of community really helps in your experience.
Well, it really, really does, because for over 25 years, I didn't know anybody. So I'm like I'm on a rocky boat at the moment. Sorry about this. I didn't actually know anybody else that had Parkinson's. But with the advent of social media, I've not only found a really incredibly empowering community, I found genuine friends and carers of all ages, and they dispel myths that are put out by pharma. For example, I don't know whether any of you are aware of agonists and Parkinson's disease. Now, this might be controversial, but according to statistics, 20% of people who are on agonists suffer quite destructive side effects. Every single person I speak to who's taken or is on agonists has experienced difficulties. So someone somewhere isn't telling the truth. Now, I've only found that out by being a part of the community. But let me tell you a positive story. Last Tuesday, 5 of us Parky people went to the Imperial Palace in Kyoto, which is a long walk, and a guy who is in his early 20s. I've actually had Parkinson's since I was 7. But this guy was in his early 20s. He was looking after me, making sure I didn't fall in any moats or fall into anything on the ground or go anywhere or wobble anywhere I wasn't supposed to. And he was, nobody else, I didn't ask him to, nobody else. He just did it out of his own sense of community. And he helped, and going back on the tube at night, there was an elderly guy from our group who was particularly bad with his walking, but he's ex-RAF. So two of the girls who've also got Parkinson's Lynx, either side of him, I'm going 1, 2, 1, 2, and it must have looked very strange. We're all marching down the tube station in Kyoto to this, but it just goes to show the power of the community. And it really generally is. And in Kyoto, one thing that I kind of didn't like was its inaccessibility. Now listen guys, this is a conference for people with Parkinson's, okay? So providing a lunch of a bento box, chopsticks, somebody hasn't really thought anything through that. Now, I struggle with my hands, but chopsticks is definitely a no-go. So that was a complete waste of resources. But it's feedback, and also the actual conference centre is massive. I mean, you think you've got to walk far in this conference? Crikey. In Kyoto, you had to walk miles. I have a blister on the heel of my foot like that to prove it. Having said that, no, centre community is incredibly powerful, really powerful, but it also helps you to look at as not patients, our carers too. That's kind of the point I just wanted to make.
So what seems to be coming across is that there are a huge number of frustrations and things that just, things should not be this way, things should be better. But also a large sense of optimism. It feels like there's a bit of a tidal wave, a bit of a shift in dynamics, whether that's patients becoming more engaged, more empowered, maybe more frustrated and therefore more mobilised to do things. And I just wanted to ask each of you, what are you most optimistic and excited about for the next 3-5 years in the worlds that you occupy? Mark, do you want to start?
I think I mentioned earlier that patient centricity is a hashtag. I think in the last 12 months, it's certainly there are more people talking about it and putting some action behind it. There are trials that are designed and have been built in that period of time which have a patient-centric approach, which has involved patients from protocol design all the way through to results. Those trials are delivered on average 3 months faster than normal trial. So the proof is in the pudding. Those cost time savings actually equate to something like $75 million worth of extra profit. So there's a reason to do it as well for those people who are only looking at the bottom line. But obviously that means it's I think that the opportunity that we're actually starting to have the conversation, and an honest one. You know, we're not just sitting there, like I said earlier, and saying we're patient-centric, this is great. It's about calling it out and saying, well, that's just not good enough. We need to start actually doing this thing. I think the fact that it started is good. It's really now about how we take that momentum forward and how we really deliver that across all studies. I mean, there are 50,000, I checked this morning actually, there are 50,000 active recruiting studies in the world right now. There are 300,000 registered on clinicaltrial.gov. There's another 30,000 studies that are waiting to start recruiting. This isn't a small challenge. Yeah, so it's really going to take buy-in, and I think it's interesting that we're at a technology conference, and we're talking a lot about people, but I think for me the biggest thing that if anyone wants to take away from it and what we have to do going forward, and I think it's understanding that it's the little things that can make the biggest difference, and we shouldn't be over-layering and overthinking the solution with tons of technology or a whole host of different processes that just make everything even more convoluted. Let's just put a travel solution in for a patient. Let's put a prepaid credit card in as a solution. Let's take the simple things and make those things better, because 85% of studies fail to retain patients. So we know where the problems are. I think that's where we have to go now. It's about taking that next step.
Don't use chopsticks at a Parkinson's conference.
Also, that's a big learning, yeah.
What's exciting about AI?
What's exciting? What are you
so I'm super interested and excited about finding out about our complicated bodies. You know, it's only perhaps possible by all this exciting technology and AI that's coming out, and so patient feedback loops, which will pretty much make personalised treatments, something that the mass, not just for a few people, but the masses can access. And with my other hat on, I'm Jess's COO at Act for Cancer, so I'm very, very interested in obviously the next gen personalised treatments that we're looking at sort of campaigning for in cancer, but something like the menopause, which is again very taboo, and pretty much was left alone for about 25 years by academia, after some pretty hard-hitting research came out, which has since been sort of overturned. But anyway, so there's very little out there about what's happening to the menopausal body, and so I'm just really interested and excited about anything that kind of gets under that bonnet. Yeah.
Matt, I'm going to have to ask you to be brief on this one.
Okay.
What are you excited about?
No, I'm really excited about AI and deep brain stimulation. I came across an Italian neurologist in Hong Kong on the way back who's introduced me to a company called Neuronica, based out of Milan. And they're a year away from launching a AI system that learns what are the best settings in your brain. And that to me would be brilliant, because I get mine wrong, as you can see. And if a machine could learn the best settings for me and make me walk okay, so I could eat with chopsticks, I'd be happy.
That'd be great. That's a good patient outcome, right?
Yeah,
Good patient outcome.
super.
Thank you. Chelsea?
In terms of kind of my work and the space that I'm focused on, I'm excited about a more personalized approach to cannabinoid therapy, and being able to analyze our DNA and understand that kind of nuanced approach that we need to take with cannabinoid therapies, so that we can see that, THC might have one effect on someone and make them feel anxious and paranoid, but on someone else, it might be incredibly helpful and soothing, and make them feel creative and calm, and I think we are getting there slowly, and that's going to be incredibly exciting to be able to understand that we all respond differently, and I think I'm excited about the truth continuing to prevail when it comes to this plant, and almost going back to our roots, and looking at our history, and looking at how we were using this plant before Prohibition. And so, just the end of Prohibition in general.
Fantastic. And Jess, final word from you.
I'm a firm believer in the contagious power of hope and optimism and belief, and I think it's really important for all of us as advocates of this change to just believe that it's possible, and I think we all do from different perspectives. I think we're at a really exciting time where there, with the kind of critical mass that can build from the kind of from tech innovation all the way across to what's happening in development of new molecules and all of that kind of techie side of stuff, but also with the groundswell of really empowered, informed, not just patients, just people, normal people who know a hell of a lot about their conditions, their loved ones who know more about it than any doctor, quite frankly, often does. You know, it's so interesting, Chelsea, hearing you talk. I mean, literally your kind of summary of how you've interacted with the kind of medical profession and stuff. It literally could be word for word what our experience was with Mum. I mean, literally word for word. And I think that we're at a time when, you know, people, families, patients, whatever you want to call them, is poised to be an integral part of the solutions that drive things forward. And I just think, you know, that we're very soon going to reach a kind of critical mass where all those things converge, and then the new frontiers will start to open. I think we're just, you know, we're not long off.
Wonderful conclusion. So, a new frontier driven by the contentious power of hope. I think we should put that on a t-shirt. I'd just like to thank all our panellists. I think you'll agree this has been a profoundly inspiring discussion, and I don't use that word, you know, lightly. I think in the space that we're in, looking at the potential for AI and technology and the sort of disruptive power of innovation, just taking some time to hear people's stories and listen to what they've been through and the experiences they have, and the phenomenal expertise and passion they bring to these really challenging questions about health and healthcare and people fundamentally. And the fact that we all just want to live ordinary lives is quite astonishing. So please join me in thanking our fantastic panel.